Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Releasing Your Inner Dragon with Drake and Marie. I am one of your hosts, Max Alexander Drake. I'm an award-winning novelist. I teach writing all over the world. As always, with me is my co-host, Marie.
Hi, my name is Marie Mullaney. I write fantasy books and I run a YouTube channel called Just in Time Worlds, all about fantasy world building.
And in today's episode, we're actually going to do kind of one of those choppy episodes where we cover a couple different topics because none of these will actually fill a full episode. We're going to start with one of our trope episodes, and then we'll go into a couple writing things. But before we get into it, as always, please help us defeat the evil algorithm and like, share, subscribe, favor us. You are on social media. You have writer friends out there that need to listen to us. So share it out with them, recommend us to people. All of that helps us out tremendously. We've been working diligently for you for what, 3 years now? We're not asking for much. Like, you can throw us a bone every now and again. It would be very, very much appreciated. All right. So what trope are we talking about today?
We are talking about the trope of why are there so many orphans? And specifically, we're going to talk about different genres and orphans' role, but specifically, there are so many orphans in young adult fantasy, or at least the parents are missing. And we're going to talk about why that is a trope and what the purpose of it is and how you work around that or not.
Yeah, because I don't think people realize, I've had this discussion so many times with people that aren't in the industry, new writers, or, they're doing their story, whatever. Now, a lot of people do this just innately, and that's unfortunately the problem with a lot of tropes. It's like, they write an orphan character, and it's like, why do you have an orphan character? Because Harry Potter was an orphan? Like, they don't really understand. But it actually is psychological, and it has to do with the reader, not the genre or anything like that. So in middle grade, when you're writing young kids, the parents need to be there, and the parents need to be active in it. Now, they can't solve the problem of the story. The child character still needs to do that, but having the parents there and having them have an active role is very important, because at that age, for us parents, you remember when your kids were 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, they still liked you. They still thought you were smart. They still, felt that you actually were competent and someone to be relied upon. And so that's the age of the readers. And you want to give the readers what they're looking for. However, then they turn 13 and they realize that you're an idiot, that you're hateful, that you're in their way. They don't want to have anything to do with you. Like, why are you bugging me? And that's the age of the starting for why, young adult. And we're going to go through that through our, till we hit 20 or so. And so that audience doesn't want to follow a character who has loving parents. They just don't. They want them to be completely self-reliant. And so that's why so many people kill off the parents, because it's just an easy way to get rid of them out of the story. But even if they're there, they can't be reliant on them in any way, shape, or form. That's why either you'll have a toxic relationship or you'll have a single, a divorced parents or whatever. And then once you get past that, as all of us eventually do, you realize, oh, right, I was just a stupid teenager and my parents are actually not as bad as I thought they were, or not as stupid as I thought they were, or whatever. And of course, not everybody falls into that. Everybody has crappy parents, and there are horrible people out there, and me and you are no exceptions to that. But it is what it is. So that's really the reason for it.
I think for me, the biggest thing that I would say about this trope is that I wish that more young adult authors would spend just a little bit more time to come up with something different, right? Now, granted, I mean, we did both of those things. We made Buri an orphan, and we made Lyron a single father household, right? But we did give Buri an adult support structure, which was her sister. We just made her sister sick, and part of her motivation was, that sister could have been a mother. It just worked better for the story purpose to have it be a sister.
Right.
And I feel like you can still have your young adult story where the parents are not involved. You don't, not everybody has to be necessarily an orphan.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I agree.
or especially, okay, hold on, let me speak more clearly. Not every character has to be completely without an adult support structure, because that's really what it's about, right? It's not actually about being an orphan per se. It's about lacking an adult support structure and being completely self-sufficient. And that I feel is like a thing that is too often accomplished by, let's just kill all the adults.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think
um,
that's where Rowling actually did a really good job with Harry Potter, because he found that adult support structure in his teachers once he got to Hogwarts, and in Hagrid and McGonagall, and obviously Dumbledore and all of that.
yeah.
And in a weird way, Snape.
I will say I have a problem with Dumbledore in that respect. But that's because of the ending, and I don't like the way that Harry Potter ended. I feel like it tanked a lot of growth, and it made Dumbledore someone that I really yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I feel like, and I have no inside information on this, but I feel like the attitude was, I'm going to nuke this ending so bad and salt the earth so that I never have to come back here ever again, and no one will ever ask me to come back here ever again. That's what it
And then she
feels like to
did.
me again. And then she
And then
did.
she did.
Because
Yeah.
like, oh right, this is a cash cow. I can make a lot of money off of it.
But yeah, I just, that ending really, when I then went back and read the first book again, I was like, oh, I don't like this. Because I now know where the story goes. And now I'm
Right.
like, no, no. Anyway,
Right.
but that's a different topic. But yes,
Yeah.
you know, certainly like having people find a support structure, because this is the other thing, especially in long running YA series, right? I feel like you can't just have the teenagers be complete adults. They're
Right.
going to need to lean on, they're going to need some kind of example adult, or somebody they can ask, or somebody they can, you know, because I was a teenager, and yes, I had my issues with my mom, and, you know, I mean, everybody does, right? I hate you, and you slam your door and you carry on, whatever. But you do eventually come back to a point where you're like, Mom, I don't know how to do blah. Mom, I don't know how to change a tire.
You're going to your mom to change tires. That's an interesting
You
turn
try
of
go to
events.
my dad any day.
Yeah, no, same.
My mom could change tires with the best of them.
Well, and the funny thing is, so like in the first Genesis saga, um, the boys, the two teenage boys, basically, their mother and father are there. They're in a happily, committed relationship. Um, Dad is very honorable, very much whatever, and but I don't consider that, even though it's now won 2 awards for in the young adult genre. I don't consider it a YA book. I never considered a YA book, even though, technically 2 of the protagonists are in that YA age group. So I wasn't worried about that. What I was really doing with that was I wanted to show where these boys came from, what their foundation was. So as you followed them and they went out on their own, you would better understand why they were making the decision they made, and then also understand when they made the wrong decisions, when they would come back, how they would get back on track. What was the path that was going to bring them back? And it was their upbringing. But it had the weird, unforeseen consequence of, I had hundreds of emails from fans about their father. And like, they were like, oh, I see what you're doing here. I know you introduce him and he's just a farmer and a hard worker and a good guy, but he used to be an adventurer or a warrior, or he's a secret mage, or and like, they just went on and on. And I can't believe how many emails I got in off of that. And I was like, he's a farmer. He's literally a farmer. He's never been anything but a farmer. He will die a farmer. He is just a good man. That's it. That's what he is in the story. And I don't know. It's funny that nobody, they were like, nope, nope, no one puts, no one puts this character in like this unless they're going to use him for some, secret whatever. And maybe, the Wheel of Time also kind of salted that, where you find out that uh Tam, Rand's father, who's supposed to be just a farmer, is actually this other thing or whatever. But I think it would actually weaken my story if I was to ever, do something like that. And I have no intention of doing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny that they can't accept a good male role model as just that.
I don't, it's not even that it's just a good male role model. It's like they struggle to accept anyone, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like who's just a good parent.
Yeah.
And that's their entire role in the story, is just
Well, and
to
again,
be a
that's
good parent.
because in YA,
Yeah.
those are the exceptions, not the
Yeah.
rules. The rules are kill them
Yeah.
all. And that does make sense because the reader doesn't want the character being saved by the parents, because they don't, that's not going to fantasy fulfill anything for them, because the reason why they're here is because they live in a world where their parents are still kind of running their lives, and they're in that in between age where they're trying to break away and become independent and everything like that, and that's where their mindset is at. So they want to take an adventure where the character is self-reliant. And the boys are that, they both leave, and
Yeah.
for the rest of the time they have nothing to do with their parents, so all their actual decisions are based off of that. But there was just no need for me to start them, and then they do come into play. They go home several times during the saga, so it's, the parents do reappear and come back, and for different reasons and different things, and so it humanizes them, in my opinion. But again, going against the grain, but that's kind of the genesis of the Genesis saga. Was I wanted to take a bunch of fantasy tropes that are just done to death, and orphans were one of them, and I'm like, nope, they're not going to be orphans. Not only, and they're not going to be single parent orphans. They're going to have a solid rock foundation at home that raised them, and
Actually,
that they can go back to.
if I think of the Harry Potter books, there's like Ron Weasley, right? Now Ron has a very solid family, a
Yep.
big family.
Yep.
And yet he still gets to be part of the adventure, etc., because he
Mhm.
goes away from the home to where he doesn't have access to the family. And that,
Yep.
I guess, is the lesson I feel like young adult authors should take away from this. You don't have to kill the parents. You just have to have a reason, an organic reason why the kids are not there.
Yep.
But I do want to move to adult fantasy, right? And talk about the different relationship you have there if you have parents. Obviously,
Mhm.
your characters might be of the age where they don't have parents, because, people do lose their
Right.
parents at kind of these ages. But if they don't, if your characters have parents, in adult fantasy, it gives you a thing that in that genre, I think, is too often not lent on, which is the ability for the character to confront the parent not as a child but as an equal.
Yeah.
And that growth into equality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, also, so like one of my proudest moments in the first book of Genesis is the younger of the two brothers. He's 17 in the story, so he's just right on that cusp, but he's not really an adult, but he, obviously for the whole book is separated. But when he comes back, on his way to finishing the quest, he does stop at home, because it's in between where he was and where he's going. And they didn't know where he went. He just disappeared as far as they were concerned. And so once he's back, of course, they're relieved parents, and they're like, oh my God, you've been gone for weeks, and we thought you were dead. And, because it is a dangerous world. And he's like, yeah, I'm fine. I did, this thing happened. I got to go. And they're like, you're not going anywhere. Like, no, like, screw you. You're home. You're safe. Because that's exactly what I would do. Like, no, all I care about is that you're safe. And he's like, but I promised I would do this. And they're like, I don't care. Like, I don't know this person you promised. I don't care about this person. And the thing that I love about that moment is it's Arderi literally bringing all of his upbringing back, because he says to his father, if I did that, if I did what you're telling me to do right now, I would not be the man you raised me to be. Is that what you want? And so it forces his father to have to go, wait a minute, do I actually believe in how I've lived my life and how I've raised my sons just for the knowledge that I'm going to keep him safe? And it's the danger is mostly past there. He's now back in the civilized lands. He's going to another city. It's not, I mean, it's dangerous, but it's not dangerous. It's not going out and fighting dragons. So, there's that. So yeah, I really do love that moment where Arderi is able to go, wait a minute now, I was a child when I left here. But after going through this, I now understand why I was raised the way I was. I understand why you force fed all this stuff to me my whole life, because you knew I was going to have to lean on this to make decisions on my own. And now you're telling me to abandon all of that. And so it's this beautiful moment of both for Tannen, the father, where he's like, oh, crap, I do have to be accountable to my own deeds. And then also, oh, crap, this is not the same boy who left a month ago. And then also with Arderi going, oh, I get it now. I get why, I didn't realize I was making all these decisions as I was out away from them because I had this base of how I was raised that affected my decision making in a good, positive way. And so I just love that scene. I love that moment. I love that growth arc for both those characters. And without, obviously, if he was an orphan, or if dad was not in the picture or whatever, if dad was a drunk and a piece of garbage or whatever, you're not having that great scene. We talked about before the podcast, we talked about another scene that really touched me because I'm slowly finishing up Ted Lasso. I'm about halfway through season 3, but there's this one character that has been the light. He's always positive. He's always good, no matter what chaos is going on around him in the story. He's like, but you got to look at the better side of things. You got to let this go. You got to forgive. You got to do whatever. And throughout it, the father was never in it, but the father was in it he would send text messages back and forth and you'd read them, or he'd answer the phone. He's like, hey, Dad, how you doing? And there'd be this beautiful, you'd only get one side of the conversation, but you knew what was going on, or you knew the relationship that they had. And then, of course, he also said, well, my dad always says, and, that was how they brought it in as well. And then last couple of episodes, that character started taking the wrong path for him, out of character for him. He basically starts getting a little bit of radicalization. He gets a little bit too deep into politics. He sees himself as bigger than what he actually is, because he's just a football player. He's not, some amazing humanitarian that he's not Gandhi. He doesn't understand the human psyche. He kicks a ball on a field and he has millions of fans because of it. And so many famous people forget the fact that just because you're famous doesn't mean you know what you're talking about. And so there's the next episode is his father actually shows up, and right at the height of that. And there's this beautiful moment when it comes to the end of it where his dad is like, let me remind you of the things that you really are. You're not this person. Now, they don't say any of these words. It's all through subtext and all of that. But it's this beautiful moment where he's like, oh, right, I got lost. I went off the wrong path. And now this anchor, this good man, has brought me back to the path that I want to walk, that I actually believe in walking. He's showing me, because we all get lost. We all lose sight of it. So it's this beautiful, amazing, touching moment between father and son. Because, the dude's 21. He's uber rich. Most of these guys are driving Lamborghinis or, whatever. So they're all spending $250,000 on just cars, much less everything else. I mean, they're in the top echelon of professional athletes. So they're all millionaires, multimillionaires. And this kid's 21. And so it was beautiful. I mean, I loved, because I was, for the two episodes or so that he was going down the path, it really hurt my soul. I was like, oh man, why would you take this character down this path? I don't want this character to be like this. And of course, that's what you want your audience feeling. You want them hurting because of these decisions, because then it makes the 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 lesson that's learned so much more impactful. And so, yeah, it was just a beautiful, beautiful moment. But now we're talking, that's really an adult audience is going to appreciate that. And Ted Lasso is for, you're not going to see many 15-year-olds watching Ted Lasso. That's definitely for our age group or whatever. And so they're writing, for us. They're writing for, see, this is what you probably should have done when you were 21. It's like, yeah, I really should have probably done that when I was 21. So we're that, and that's why you have to think about the psyche of the audience.
Yeah.
Because again, as I've said so many times, the only thing that's real is the audience.
And that's why, like, we say that genre is just a marketing tactic, and yes, it is a marketing tactic, but especially when you get deep into like the noir genre versus dark, like those things are mostly marketing. but
Dino porn.
Broad categories of genre, like your broad category genres, tell you what your audience is expecting, right? And young adults read the most. They read by far and away the most. Okay, they have the most time on their hands, and they will plow through a book in a weekend. I remember reading like that as a kid, and I can't do it anymore. There's just too many demands on my time.
Yeah, you're just too busy.
Yeah. Now, the thing is, so therefore, there are many young adult books out there because it's an eternally voracious market. And because of the
and every
adult
year
thing,
they get more.
And every year they get more. And because of the adult structure needs to be missing, there are all the orphans in young adults. And it feels like every book you read is just an orphan. So if you're going to write for young adults, maybe think of finding a different way to remove that adult structure.
Well, and I talked about this last night at my critique pod. It's not about following the rules. It's about understanding why the rule exists. So, and we're going to talk about this in one of the other things we're going to talk about today. I'm going to go down this same path. If you understand, like, if you just are like, oh, you're writing YA, you have to kill the parents. Like, okay, I'll do that. But you're just following blindly. What you really want to understand is why. Why do I kill the parents? Well, because the audience doesn't want to follow a character whose parents are, making decisions for them because they're at that age where they want to be self-reliant. Oh, okay. So I don't have to kill the parents. I just have to make sure that I'm not stepping on the toes of my audience, and their age bracket. Okay. And see, once you start learning the whys of things, then you can do, oh no, they've got, really great parents, or they have an abusive father, if that's the story you were telling, or they have, now you can actually use the parents as an integral part of the story and let them, and maybe that is that they're dead. Maybe they did die when he was born or when she turned 12 or whatever, because that was this huge thing that you need for the character. But now you're doing it to better the story, as opposed to, why is your character an orphan? Well, because Harry Potter was an orphan. Like that doesn't do anything for your story.
Yeah.
So that's the big reason why I'm such a big why guy. Don't just tell me the rules. Anyone can follow rules, but that isn't creative. Creative is the first word of creative writing. And there's nothing creative about just following a set of rules that somebody else dictates to you. The important part of it is understanding why those rules were created, and then, just making sure you don't break the why. Like, obviously, if you're writing YA and you have the parents, solving all the problems, you're not going to be successful because the audience is not going to like the story. So, that's what you need to think about. And that's why it's so important for me to have the whys. Why does this rule exist?
And that segues us neatly into speech tags, where we have a very definitive rule if you ask any publisher. Only use said and asked, nothing else. Now, that rule has a why to it. And the why is that most authors, especially starting out, use completely incorrect speech tags if they don't use those two. They start using strange things as speech tags, or you'll come across gems like whispered softly. or muttered under his breath,
or shouted loudly.
shouted loudly. Yes, is another classic.
Yeah.
Or they'll use things which just straight up aren't speech tags, like shrugs. He'll be like, he shrugs. How does pulling up your shoulders imply anything coming out of your mouth?
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So, for the industry, instead of going, well, I got two choices. I can explain to every new writer, the millions and millions that are out there, how to correctly use speech tags, or I can just tell you, don't do it. Don't do it. Use the word said, be done. We don't care. And if you use anything else, we're not going to publish you. And so, it was easier for them to just give you this blanket statement. But when you get into the why, like you said, the why is because you use it in a stupid way. Like, you're not using a speech tag for what it's. A speech tag is there to show not only who said the line of dialogue or who's about to say the line of dialogue, but how it is said, not what they're doing. That's why I keep saying, if you ever write a speech tag and then an action, cut the speech tag. So don't write, he said as he walked across the room. Like, just write the dialogue and then Drake walked across the room, because that will give me who said it without telling me the word said. And that's why we have action tags, is because, you're using what you're really doing at that point. I don't like calling them action tags because it sounds like the word tag throws a lot of people off. They're like, okay, so I still use a comma to separate an action tag, just like a speech. No. So I hate the word action tag. Really what you're doing is you're using paragraph structure to make sure the reader doesn't get lost on who's talking. Because remember, in prose, a paragraph is one moment of time for one person. So it's everything they're doing and everything they're saying in this millisecond or this year. I mean, a paragraph could be a year, and we've talked about that. So it's just one unit of time, whatever that unit is, a millisecond, a minute, 10 minutes, 3 years, whatever that unit is. But that paragraph is what they're doing in that unit of time. And so no one gets lost. If you write, Drake walked across the room, period, quote, hey, Marie, how you doing today? No one is confused at who said that. It's all in the same paragraph, and we don't have to write, and then he said, comma, hey, Marie, how you doing? We don't need that. So, yeah, again, it's just understanding the why that we're doing it. And yeah, I know we've talked about speech tags a lot, but last night at the Critique Pod, it was yet one more thing that we went and talked about a lot, with speech tags and, incorrect uses of speech tags and weird, because it just throws, when you really push yourself and you're doing, what is it? Pontificated, or whatever that word is. Pontificated. That's what it is. He pontificated. Like, no, I'm done. Like, you start doing weird crap like that, and you're not being clever. You're actually going to throw the reader out of the story.
Yeah. And shrugs is not a speech tag.
No.
You put a period, you make that a capital letter, it's an action tag. It's not a speech tag.
Although, well, just because you went there, a lot of people are like, oh, well, I should limit my speech tags. I should cut them down. So let me use these action tags. And then you get, he shrugged. Like, Drake walked in and said this dialogue, he shrugged, and then he nodded, and then she nodded, and then he shrugged, and then she shrugged, and then nodded and shrugged and nodded and nodded and shrugged and shrugged and nodded and nodded. Like, that also is incorrect.
Don't forget the sighing. The sighing is also plentiful.
Right. Yes. Sigh, shrug, nod, shrug, sigh, nod. If you're going to do that, use said, because the reason why is said becomes invisible. The reader doesn't see it. So even though you said 30 times in one page, no one even sees it. You shrug 5 times on a page, and the reader's going to be like, oh my goodness, does everybody shrug in this world? Like, is that all they're doing is shrugging? So you have to be, that's the thing. And that, like, with me, since I don't use speech tags at all, one of the hardest things about that is coming up with, how many lines of dialogue are in a chapter? Every single action tag has to be different. But sometimes people do sigh a couple times in one conversation. Anyone who's been scolding a 6-year-old knows you're going to sigh a few times during that. So you just have to be cognizant of that, and you got to not constantly repeat yourself with those repetitive words.
I tend to like, if I have to use sigh, I use sigh, but I also try to describe sigh a little more these days. Like, he blew out a long whistling breath. It's still a sigh, but at least it's
Right.
it's kind of like disguised sigh.
He let out a heavy breath and shook his head. That shows disappointment as opposed to just telling.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those are ways around it. But you also still can't just have 50. I mean, as I picked on you about with the first draft of Magic Falls, a lot of spines. Just everything was the spine. Or a lot of puking, a lot of they just had a lot of upset tummies in that world. So we all have it. I have mine too. I double dip on all sorts of things. It's, everyone has their writer's tics. It's the important thing is being aware of them so that when you get into editing mode, okay, I always do this, so like one of the things that I do nod, shrug, and sigh a lot, because in that first draft, I'm not thinking about, I'm trying to just, I'm watching this move in my head. I'm putting down that first draft. And so there's a lot but one of my macros is overused words. Now they're my overused words. So what's in there is sigh, shrug, nodded, eyed, there's a list of them. And not just those, because I overuse just and only too much as well. It was funny because we pulled up, somebody asked me about adverbs, and they were like, because I had rewritten this one thing for somebody and I put an adverb in it. And they were like, well, wait a minute now. Adverbs, I've listened to you and Marie talk about it. Adverbs are bad. Don't use them at all. I'm like, no. Neither one of them ever said don't use them at all. It's about making sure that you use the correct one when, it's needed. If the adverbs are always telly, so we could describe it, but if describing it doesn't enhance the moment, then you're wasting words describing it. Just use the adverb. And so I actually opened just a random chapter of mine, and we went through and counted 6,000 words. There were 11 adverbs in it. Now, this is not fully edited yet, but it has been edited quite a bit. So 6,000 words, 11 adverbs, 5 of them were the word only. So almost 50% of my adverbs were the word only. So it's like, yeah, I do. That's one of my things.
I do use a bit more adverbs than that, because I feel like there's a point where you're like, okay, I have described plentiful what is going on here.
Right.
An adverb or two will help speed the reader along. And that to me is what an adverb does. It's a little bit of a like, this is not that important, let's speed along.
That's why it's always funny when one of my beta readers are like, this whole paragraph is info dumping right here in the middle of your story. I'm like, it's 3 sentences and a 6,000 word chapter that is all showy. Yes, I info dump there, and no one is going to notice it. It's not 3 pages of exposition backstory where you're just like, I am so bored. Why are you teaching me an encyclopedia worth of crap? It's 3 lines in a paragraph.
But if you bring those 3 sentences back to why it's important to the character,
right,
then of course. Like
maybe, but sometimes I just want to use an adverb. Sometimes I just want info dump for a couple of sentences, get it out of the way, and then move on.
I'm a Nazi on info dumping. I'm a Nazi on info dumping and on flashbacks. Like, they have to really justify their existence for me to tolerate them.
Well, I'm the same way with adverbs. So, again, that's the thing. Everybody has their author's voice thing. Well, we've talked about how I actually kind of like colloquialisms and kind of cliches. I'm a Southern boy, and we have a lot of them in our just natural way of speaking. So it does not bother me, and I actually think they work really well. Whereas, especially grammar Nazi editors, most I don't think I've ever ran into a fan that's like, oh my goodness, you had this when we were talking about the line. The monster was shaking fire off of it, and it, I described it as a massive dog coming in out of the rain. Because to me that just paints this picture, because we've all seen the big hairy dog shaking and water just flinging everywhere, and so I love that image. I don't see any fans ever popping that. However, your hardcore editors are like, because they've got that mantra: no cliches, no cliches, no cliches, no cliches, can't have them. They're just like, no, there's no rules. There's just understand why, because they get overused. Well, how many times have you read that line where you're looking at a giant bug monster that's covered in fire, and it was described, as it's shaking, it was described as a massive dog coming in out of the rain? Probably never. like so yes, it's a cliche. I'm fine with it. It paints the picture that I want. So that's the thing is, all of these that we talk about, everyone who listens to this, and we forget sometimes to mention this because we say things like everyone does. You say it as fact because to you it is fact, but it's fact to your author voice. It's fact to my author voice. So really, you need to be listening to all this advice and then taking it in and going, how do I want my voice to come across? Do I want to be a really crappy telly writer with, 3 adverbs in every sentence because that's what I want? Then do your thing, man. I mean, your fan base is going to be smaller than most people's, but do your thing. So that's
so I think that also, yeah, so that also is a good place to segue onto the last thing we want to talk about, which is summarizing when you do it, why you do it, and when you have to do it. Please, dear God, do it in these circumstances.
Yeah.
Because info dumping is sometimes summaries can read a little bit like an info dump, where you kind of just summarize a series of events. Now, the thing is, when should you summarize? Let's start there. In my opinion, if you are giving information that the reader already has and you're just distributing it between characters, summarize. Always summarize on this dialogue. You put a one-word sentence in going like, Louis told a Lund about blah. Done. That's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I understand why, I use the term younger writers. I don't mean age-wise. I mean time in grade. It's why I understand why so many younger writers do it, because they're like, but this character doesn't know this information, and I need the reader to know that this character knows this information, so I'm going to show it by this conversation. And they're just forgetting the magical golden Drake rule. There is nothing real in the story except for the reader. So if the reader has the information, the character's not real. The character doesn't need to know. The reader may need to know that the character knows, that the character's learned, which is why you go, and then, Louis told John about the monster attack. Done. I lived it with you. I was there. I saw the monster attack. I know how it ends. Like, I'm good with all of it. You just, you want me to know that John knows about it, then just literally info dump, tell me that it happened, because I already know that information. So I think that's where a lot of people, if you can really wrap your head around the fact that there is nothing real in your story, none of your characters are real. They don't actually have emotions. They don't actually need to know anything. They don't actually do anything. They're fake. Everything that you write is for the impact of the reader. And so when you re-describe, then you have a conversation between 2 characters where they're describing something the reader knows, what is the impact on the only thing that's real? Boredom and frustration of, why am I seeing the same thing I've already seen? That's the impact.
It's the same reason why writing the same scene from a different character's point of view generally doesn't work, says Marie, who's literally just read a book that is exactly that. But
yeah,
like, the authors bought my loyalty a long time ago. So.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've talked about that one scene that I have. It's the same scene from 4 characters' perspectives, and there is each scene, each one of them gets about 1,500 words, and there is one line that's the same in each one of them. It's a dude walking in a circle handing out things, and that's it. That is the only thing. And I only do that to make sure that the audience knows that all 4 of these conversations are happening simultaneously, because it's this God individually talking to them in their minds, but they don't hear the other 3 conversations. So I have this one moment where this guy is walking around handing something to each of the 4 characters. And so that happens in every one of the chapters. That's it. Everything else is completely unique. And oh my God, the hate mail. Like, I can't believe I had to read this chapter with 4 exact things that happened. Why am I rereading 4 exact? Like, seriously, it was maybe 12 words. Everything else is unique. And yet they still felt that they were reading the same thing over again.
Yeah. But
you
that's the
know,
thing, right? So summarize when you're giving readers information that is the same. Absolutely summarize. Yeah. The only exception to that is when one character is lying to the other one, in which case it is no longer the same information, because now it's a whole different ball game, right?
yeah, that's brand new information.
Yes,
The reader
exactly.
is learning something they didn't know. They're learning that facts that they know are being distributed incorrectly. And
Which,
that is important.
is important and interesting to the reader. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the other thing that I think that you should generally summarize, or at least partially summarize, is if the character is doing training. Like, not all training, obviously. You want to show at least the start of training. But what in a movie would be covered in a montage, you probably just want to summarize that stuff, because you are never going to write a montage that's going to have the Rocky music and so
You can
you
also
just
do a
want to
lot of
say,
that.
like, you show the training and then you're like, and then they spent 2 months doing this, or
That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is off screen, to where
yeah.
you've shown it once and then you have a scene, and at the end of it, the guy's like, all right, well, you ready for train for the next 2 hours? Like, can we skip today? Nope. Go get your sword. And then the chapter ends. And like, now you know that. So you can do a lot of this off screen with that's just implied that, oh, right, while I'm not watching this movie, they're training.
Exactly. You just have to show it once, and then you can just like have it keep happening, little references to it, etc.
Prefer references to here or there, or whatever.
Yeah. Because that lets the reader know that this skill that the character is going to have at the end of it is hard earned. They have trained for it. So it doesn't feel like it comes out of nowhere. But at the same time, you don't have to endure as a reader 50 training sessions that are all the same.
Yep. And you do, I like to start, like that one that I just threw out is the beginning of it. We're not going to see it. We're just going to hear them starting about it. But maybe the next scene, which is going to have this event happen, I start it with them just finishing training. And so the character's panting and sweating, and the guy's like, all right, good work today. You still suck, but, good work or whatever. And then they're drying off and doing whatever. And, we know that they, even though it has nothing really to do with maybe the scene that I'm writing, it happens in the location. So we can just start there just to constantly remind, without showing without dragging the reader down the redundancy through this. We can allow the reader to constantly be reminded, oh, right, every chance they get, they're doing this thing.
Yeah.
So many ways. You can summarize, you can do it off screen. You can also just, heck, if you have another POV character or whatever, they can talk about it. I've seen that a million times too, where they're like, yeah, man, mentor dude is just running me ragged. Like, we're out drinking and there's something that's happening important in the scene that's going to move the story. But during that scene, we're going to talk about how much I hate training or how much I enjoy training or whatever, whatever the attitude of that character is. But we're not actually. So there's a third way that we're getting that information in there.
But don't show 50 training sessions.
Yeah. And you can't write a montage.
No,
everyone has seen the movies, and you're like, I'm going to write this montage.
You can't write a montage. You can see montages are unique to movies. There's just, you're not going to write a montage in a prose. There's just too much like quick flash cutovers, music, everything else that goes into that. I know, right? I can hear Rocky playing in my head.
Yep.
Especially Rocky 4. For me, the Rocky 4 montage was the best montage. Like
jumping rope and hitting the bag and hitting the little punching bag and running and lifting weights. And you got so many things. You just everyone's seen them a million times. So you just a second here, second there, second here, second there, second there. You can't write that.
You can't.
There are advantages that visual medium has over prose, but there are a lot of advantages that prose has over visual medium.
Exactly.
You have to work within your medium.
Yeah. So just don't try and write a montage. Just summarize.
Mm-mm.
Summarize or just refer to it or off-screen it or something.
Yep.
Then, where you really need to be very careful with summaries, and I have seen this way too often, is, okay, so you're having a time skip. Okay, cool. Cool. Everybody has time skips. I get it. The first 3 paragraphs of your next chapter is a summary of what happened in the time skip. And I hate it. I understand that it might be necessary, but I hate it. I can't. Give me something to see and then have the character think back on it. Like, I hate it when I'm reading like those 3 opening paragraphs or 4 or however, half a page, a full page, whatever, of like, the months passed. He did this, he did this, he did this, he did. I'm like, oh. I make noises like a tiny little animal as I'm reading through it.
I feel like it can be done well. I feel like I've done that before. I'm not saying I've done it well. I'm just saying I feel like I've done that before. You just need to know that if it stretches too long, it becomes very boring.
So
But
yes, so there are 2
sometimes,
things. There are 2 things. One, don't let it go too long if you really have to do it. But 2, dear God, don't let it be every chapter.
true. I mean, I was trying to think of a scene when I actually did it. So the thing about my writing is it's tight time wise. So like Harry Potter is an entire school year per novel. Most of my novels take place in 4, 5, 6 days. So there's not a lot of time between when you're with character A and then the next time you're with character A. It's just later that day or maybe that night or maybe tomorrow morning. But like it's a very tight timeline that I like writing that way. I don't necessarily like going and then 3 years later. So I don't know if I've ever done that. So I was struggling trying to see if I could pull up an example of when I did it.
So
But if you are going to do it, um, you know, just make sure that you're not boring them with this long dissertation.
I think that for me, if you're going to do that, if you're going to summarize time, then I would rather you had, you just kind of indicated that time has now passed. However you indicate that to the reader, have the character look at a calendar, have somebody mention, whatever the case is. And then have them refer back to that thing. Like, I would rather have flashbacks. I would rather have mini flashbacks of Had than have 3 paragraphs of summary, personally. Like,
Now, I want to make sure that everyone is reading the subtext on this. Marie, who loathes flashbacks, like literally it's the worst sin in writing, is telling you to do flashbacks instead of summarizing a year's passage. That should tell you the depth of her hate for that. Just want to make sure that no one misses that kind of important detail there.
Yeah, that is how strongly, like, I really like those summaries of like lists and lists of things that he's done. I'm like, either let me live through this or it's not important. One
Right.
of these 2 things is true.
Right.
But don't make me read 300 words about something that is not important because I'm not living through it.
Right.
And that's what I
But
feel
you do
about
have to
those
set the scene. So you do have to, I might write the line, summer progressed into fall, which turned into winter. And then the spring fell upon the land on this day that we're waking up or whatever. You have to, if you're going from summer to spring, from chapter to chapter, a part of setting the scene is to make sure the audience knows that we just did this big time jump.
100%. 100%.
So,
But you can do that. But you can do that with a single line. You can be like, the days of travel melded together. Sometimes they stayed at castle, sometimes they did this. And I've done that. I have absolutely done that. but I interjected that with like the character thinking about kind of the passing time, like you're almost within the character's head while she's thinking of the passing time. And it's like a paragraph or two. It's short.
Mm-hmm. And then for those major events, another way to bring them in instead of doing a flashback is you can actually make what happened impact something that is happening now. Mm-hmm. So instead of flashing back and remembering that this event happened, you actually get into a situation where it's like, doggone it, if Dan hadn't died during the winter, we wouldn't be in this mess. So instead of saying, the winter passed and unfortunately Dan died and blah, 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 we can literally get into a situation where it's like, maybe he comes back, one of the characters comes back from hunting and he's got just a squirrel and he's like, there's 5 of us. How are we going to feed a squirrel? And he's like, well, it's not my fault Dan died. He was the hunter. And it's like, then, now we know whatever. So there's organic ways to work this stuff in as well, without having to do a flashback of, remembering Dan's death in the wintertime. So there's other organic ways to do it too. Maybe the flashback works the best. Again, it's about thinking about which way is going to be the best for the story. But just know, and that's why I say this all the time too. Stop worrying about what you're writing. Worry about why. Why am I okay? So Dan died during the winter. I've skipped to the spring, but the audience needs to know that Dan is dead. Okay, that's the why. Why do I need to bring up Dan? Because Dan was in the story. Dan's no longer in the story. So I now have a reason. I've got to do this. Okay, there's a million ways to do it. It does not have to be a flashback. It does not have to be a conversation. It does not have to be in the summary of time passing. It can be anything. So, that's where you want to approach it. What would be the most organic way to get this information that I feel like I need to put in here to the audience? And then you're worried about the why you're doing stuff instead of how you're doing it. Because so many people get locked in, like, I'll be editing something and they'll have done a flashback, let's say, about Dan's death. And it's jarring. It just doesn't go with the story. And I'm like, this is jarring. You really, no, I got to do it because they got to know Dan's dead. I'm like, I'm not saying they don't need that. I'm saying the way you executed it doesn't work. And it's so hard to get younger writers to realize what I'm saying. I'm not saying cut the information. I'm saying you implemented it poorly. There's a million other ways to do it. Do something more organic, something better, something that's actually going to push the story better or whatever. So
I think my trifecta moment was when I read a flashback that happened in the middle of an action scene and was a summary of 2 months worth of training.
Did you have an aneurysm? Or just like laying on, your husband finds you just laying on the floor with drool coming out of your mouth and your eyes are rolled in the back of your head and you're just twitching.
It's making that tiny little shaking.
Show me on the doll where he touched you. Like, yeah, it's bad.
Like that.
But show me in the book where he
hurt you. So I think that if there's one thing you take away from today's podcast, it is think about why you are writing the words on the page. And if there is perhaps a better vehicle than the current words to convey the information to the reader.
And that really does go through everything. The orphan, why? The summarizing, why? Speech tags, why? And really everything that I do, all the writing and everything you do, it's always thinking about, okay, what am I trying to accomplish here? Okay, what's 3 ways that I could accomplish this? Let me look at all 3 of them and think about it. That's why, I feel like I'm such a heavy plotter, because that's what I do when I'm plotting. I know the information, and now let me think about different ways to execute instead of just puking words on the page.
And I think that is a good note on which to end this episode. And we will see you soon for another one.
Bye.